Go ahead. Gary Berndt, I think most of you know him, but he has served our community as both mayor of Cle Elum and Kittitas County Commissioner amongst a long list of other things. So welcome, Gary.
All right. So, there's some folks in this room that know more about the Teanaway than I do, Phil Hess. Where are you at? I'll get on that. Where'd he go? There he is. So keep me honest, Phil. I'll look at you, because some of the things we talked about are yours. I moved to Cle Elum March 1st, 1973. As a newly hired employee of the Washington Department of Natural Resources, at that time primarily wildland fire and putting up state timber sales that support schools. I was a brand new hire. In that regard, I came out of Chinook Pass where I'd worked summers, and I had never heard the word Teanaway. So what you get tonight is the Teanaway I know, okay? But I slide. Nothing to do with the Teanaway. Stevens Pass in the 19 for the days, folks. And probably an era I should have lived in. So here's a map of the Teanaway. I'm gonna have to suffer with me. You can't use a pointer on the screen, but right down here is the junction of the west and north fork. This up there is the middle fork of the Teanaway. It swings around and comes all the way down to Highway 10. The best that I could get off Google Earth. But that's the area we're going to be talking about. And as you can, the darker green is the timber and the lighter green is the harvested area. So there's a better map that can show that, and we'll refer to that several times. Well, to start with, when I moved here, I issued burning permits to the local folks before they were allowed to burn. And I would get phone calls that say, well, we live up just past Crusettos in the Teanaway. So, okay, what's a Crusetto? Well, we live, and after a fashion, I actually got to where I could understand. So I want to talk about those folks because I am also of Italian heritage and we had something in common. I don't know if you know it or not, but I gave a talk to the Sons of Italy when I was the mayor, and I did some research. In the first 10 years of the 19th century, 1.1 million Italian immigrants came through Ellis Island. Those are folks who were escaping political, needing asylum, disease, and poverty that would give up everything to come to the land of opportunity. Those folks came here. The only skills they had were their hands, and that's how they wound up in the mining communities, the logging communities, that sort of things. These were the salt of the earth type folks that made their living with their hands and their back. And in the Teanaway, clear back in the late 1800s, the Teanaway was an agrarian area. Hay was a big thing. Grazing was a big thing. And they could settle a piece of ground and make a living at it. So as I got a lot of respect for those folks, and I want to give you some of the names, and I think you'll like it. Let's try Frank Schober, Jess, and Keith. Jess and Keith were his sons, and Frank lived in the big brick house right at the base of the Teanaway. And I got to know him. They had a summer camp at 29 Pines. It's all gone at this point, but it was there when I first started. Chuck Ballard, Johnny Cressetto, Roy Thomas, Ted Bugney, Lori Contrado, Milt Downs, Daryl Starkovich, Don Osmanovich. A couple of my favorite, the Scarpellis, the Bazzolis, Foudads. All of those names were the people that I learned that taught me to respect and love the Teanaway. And that was only part of it. So my first trip up the Teanaway was in the spring. The wildflowers were out, the grass was green, Mount Stewart was in the background. And if you've ever stopped just past the junction of the North and the Middle Forks of the Teanaway, there's a big pine tree about 100 yards down the road. It's the most photographed and painted spot in the Teanaway because it frames the Stewarts perfectly. And you used to, I don't know if we still can because I don't get up there much. There was always somebody parked there and doing that stuff. And it just, it's what kept me going a lot was that view that we could get. So here's some of the stories that they talked about. Teanaway hooch. Anybody here ever get Teanaway hooch? Right? Come on, raise hand. All right. It's a rumor to me, but everybody said, oh, you should try the Teanaway hooch. You know, and I don't even know which one of those guys made it, but you know that. Teanaway cheese. And who made that? Chick Chikalinsky was the guy. And he was a piece of work. There's no question about it, Chick. If you ever spend any time around him, he was worth listening to, but he'd have to stop scalding a hog to talk to you because it was hanging out in the back 40. So anyway, that's kind of the way that I met. Lori Contrado, if you've met Lori started the Teanaway store. And I used to go up, he liked to do some burning. Raise your hand if you know that there's a forest lookout right on the hill. Not many do. You know how it got there? Lori took apart the a lookout up Coal Creek, forget what they call it, wasn't Coal Butte. He went up, purchased that, dismantled it piece by piece, brought it down by horseback, and rebuilt that lookout right on the hill behind the house. And you'll see it now. The trees have grown up around it. But I thought that was pretty special. He did not have the Osborne firefinder that lookouts use for azimuth. And I won't say how he got one, but he did. We were not using lookouts much anymore, and no one missed it. And we also got him a map where the lookout was the center point. But the trees have grown up now, and Lori used to go up and look for lightning. And you could stop and talk to him just about any old time. So, oh, and lookouts, Red Top Lookout is still staffed. And I don't know if you know it or not, but Red Top Lookout got the first report of the Jolly Mountain fire. And it's a guy that I used to work with, and he was so nervous and tickled that he found that. But as you know, it didn't turn out well for quite a while. So that's the only forest lookout that's still staffed. But along the way, one of those guys told me, well, you know, there used to be a lookout right on top of Teanaway Butte. Really? Okay, I'll go find it. And sure enough, the concrete footings are still there. And you can reach out and touch Mount Stewart from the top of Teanaway Butte. It's one of the really, really special places. And a little bit later on, you're going to hear how I thought to be able to get road access in the new Teanaway Community Forest, so that guys like me can get up there and have a picnic rather than having to hike 7 or 8 miles to do it. Because at some point in our lives, we can't do that. But I would not give up on Teanaway View. So logging. Logging was historic. Renee, you got a picture of your sawmill. They still live in the house. Yeah. This is the other thing that used to be the state of the art. So in about 1900 something, 1902, Cascade Lumber took over the majority of the Teanaway. And they operated, Phil, I've got till 1957, when Cascade joined with Boise Paquette and became Boise Cascade. So in the 1930s, the Teanaway and the Cascade Lumber and some of the federal sales were all had to be shipped down to the sawmill in Yakima. So these logs were rafted over the winter. When spring came, they broke the dams and sent those logs down to Yakima to be milled. I think they quit doing that in the 1930s, give or take. So logging was the next big thing. Remember, there's showbers with cattle, showbers with hay. All those guys raised hay, raised cattle, raised sheep, and most of all, the timber. That's not a good picture, but that's how they hayed with horses. And it kind of almost looks like ballad, but I'm not sure. So I took a little tour of the Teanaway, starting at Ted Bugney's. I was standing on the bridge, taking that picture, looking up the Teanaway, and that's really unchanged. I met, any of you know Ted Bugney by any chance? You ever meet a grumpier guy? But we got along fine, but it really hasn't changed. Every time I'd get near his property, he'd show up.
Charlie.
Huh?
Charlie.
Is that Charlie? Okay. I'm gonna get out of order here. Oh, 3 years before I got here, there was a large fire in the West Fork of the Teanaway, and they called it Camp Illahee Fire. And Camp Illahee was a scout camp. And I used to get to go up there and give a fire prevention talk. Boy Scouts, I think they cleaned it up and the Girl Scouts used it, but they always lit something in the girls' outhouse. So I used to have to go and put it out. So that's why we did fire prevention talks at Camp Illahee. But they closed that, and now it's gated off. You have to walk into where parts and pieces were. The other thing that was still there was a couple of buildings at what Boise Cascade used to call the Caslin Campground. And the Caslin was like a city, but only 2 of the buildings remained. And it's a little disappointing to me that the Teanaway Community Forest renamed that campground Teanaway Camp, because Caslin had meaning. And I wish that they wouldn't have preserved a little bit more of that.
Gary,
Yes, sir.
my folks were married in Castle in 1926.
Whoa, were you there?
Not saying.
Well, that's neat. So did they log? Your dad log?
So, my dad's brother-in-law worked for the logging outfit there. And they came over to get married in Castle by a Baptist Presbyterian minister from Cleo. And they ended up living in North Bend. It wasn't until I moved over here that Bruno Panetto and I were taking something up there for somebody, and he showed me what Casbon was.
Was, yeah. Yep. There was still one big office building, nobody was using it, but it piques your interest to try and find out some of the history that went on. So that's the entrance to the Teanaway, and I want you to hold that thought. I don't know if I can get back to it or not, but that's some of my handiwork. Not universally accepted by all. That's the main entrance, I'm sorry, that's the main entrance. Right there were the ranches for sale on the left-hand side. So looking up the Teanaway. This is right at the junction of the Middle Fork, North Fork. And that big pine tree that I was talking about, I'm standing under. Okay, that's the view. Now, a couple folks, used to be the only ones that had a house there were just steadies, but there's more in there now. I don't know who's doing it. But that's still a view. And to me, in the 1980 somethings, Phil Hess, Boise put the ground for sale. You know when that was? Well, say again? 89. A whole series of events that I'll talk about a little bit later. But when I heard that Boise Cascade was willing to liquidate its properties in the Teanaway, I made a trip to Olympia with some slides to talk to Lands Commissioner Jennifer Belcher, my boss. And I said, Jennifer, in my opinion, the department should buy the Teanaway outright. And I've got other reasons for doing that. However, I believe that it truly could be the emerald gem in the state forests of Eastern Washington. And she said, we don't buy land east of Snoqualmie Pass and wouldn't even come look at it. That's when I felt that the Teanaway was in peril. And part of what happened, the Northwest Forest Plan was written in like 1993, I think. And the Northwest Forest Plan had really nothing to do with Boise Cascade. It was a federal thing, but the federal government stopped selling timber that was very important to the mill in Yakima for Boise Cascade. That dried up and went, Bill, almost overnight, lost that federal wood. Well, the state of Washington, and this was about protecting salmon, bull trout, and spotted owl primarily. And the state of Washington, and I became a regulator of state and private timber harvest, road maintenance, and road construction. And when this new State Forest Practices Act came out, it basically almost reflected the Northwest Forest Plan, which made it extremely difficult for Boise Cascade to find any timber that wasn't encumbered. Boise, I don't know when Jeff Jones came, Phil, but about that time, I think. And Jeff Jones became a certified owl hooter. And the way the owl was protected was by these giant circles of about 2,000 acres. The best 1,100 acres of old growth mixed timber had to be set aside, and you could not harvest it. Oh yeah, it was like 1.7 miles, if I remember right. Phil Hess is the expert. I hate to keep calling him, but Phil worked, how long did you work the Teanaway, Phil? So here I'm talking and he knows. So am I? So far, so good. So Phil, I'm going to make a guess. Prior to the Northwest Plan, State Forest Practices Act, I was putting up in Kittitas County about 12 million board feet of year, and a board foot is 12 by 12 by 1 inch thick, and it, don't need to try and figure it out. But Boise Cascade, off their ownership, fee lands was taking about 20 or 25 million, Bill, give or take. Forest Service was doing the same, and the major purchaser of the federal timber was Boise Cascade. At that time, Plum Creek Timber, they were exporting, and so they weren't shipping to the Yakima mill. Well, when the state's wood dried up, Boise's wood dried up, and the federal wood dried up, people lost their jobs. The mill closed and it's gone. And that's kind of how it came to be. So that then brought in a purchaser named John Rudy, right? And I don't have the year he bought it, but Boise Cascade, in my opinion, did an absolutely marvelous job of managing the timber for permanent, forever mixed conifer, multi-age stands that we all love when we go to the woods. And that's the way they manage it. It's the way I try to manage it. John Rudy, and that was called uneven aged management under the law. Boise did not have to reforest. It naturally came back. All we had to do was verify it. And John Rudy and well, I'll get the name wrong. U.S. Forest, something like that. U.S. Timberland. They came in, and in order to recover his purchase price, he logged it down to the absolute legal minimum of 20 cone-bearing trees per acre across the ownership, with the exception of the spotted owl, where he was not allowed to harvest. And that kind of made the Teanaway look like a bomb went off. And with the 20 trees per acre, then we require a lot of surveys to make sure it comes back. So if in 4 years there's not 200 young trees, they have to go plant. Well, pretty sure that John Rudy lived in New York and didn't much care. And that was the feeling that I had. And so now what comes up, and maybe some of this came before, but the rumor started circulating that John was going to sell that land and we were going to get another master plan resort up the Teanaway of about 50,000 acres. And I don't know if that would scare you, but it scared me to death. That was about the time I was mayor, and having one of them was more than enough. So what can we do? I don't know. And then and they were going to foreclose. As I understand, his credit was not all that good back there. And that's how this master plan resort was coming about. Oddly enough, raising the water level of Bumping Lake 15 feet created the opportunity to mitigate that in the Teanaway. And the state of Washington General Fund paid $99 million for 50,000 acres in the Teanaway and created the first of its kind in the state community forest. Now, how did that happen? A group here still going called the Yakima Basin Integrated Plan. There's going to be a shortage of water if climate change is real, and I say if because I don't live long. Climate is a long time. What we've seen is drier, less snow, more peril. How many of you irrigate? How much water did you get this year? Junior districts got 51%, I think. You got 0? Okay, that's what we're going to see more of. So there's an inertia to create more storage. One of the thoughts was, well, the last undammed river in the Yakima system is the Teanaway. And they undertook quite a survey, Phil, to look for a place to put a dam on the main stem of Yakima. and fortunately, could not find what I heard, enough bedrock to support a dam. And so we dodged that bullet. And there used to be survey stakes all up and down the main stem of the Yakima, or of the Teanaway. So as this Yakima Basin Integrated Plan folks got to looking at it, there was 6 projects identified. The first one is happening today as we speak, raising the dam at Lake Cle Elum 3 feet. That's one of the projects. The next one was supposed to be a 6-mile tunnel between Ketchulus and Cochise. That Ketchulus has a lot of water and a small catchment. Cochise has a small watershed and a large catchment. So they could put the water that they now spill in the springtime, theoretically, move it to Lake Cochise. 6 miles of tunnel, by the way. That's not likely to happen. That was one of the projects. The next one is to build a reservoir in the Yakima Canyon that they have to pump to fill, and then they drain it. Half for irrigation, half for fisheries. The next one was to raise bumping 15 feet. And that's when all of the people that surround Bumping Lake went up in arms, but did agree that it would not be unreasonable to mitigate that 15-foot raise to allow this community forest. Now, there's a deal that says in 2025, if these projects aren't making a certain amount of headway, these lands can be put back to the Commissioner of Public Lands and either made back to trust lands of the state of Washington or sold. And that date is coming up, Bill, some month in 2025. So we're still, the Teanaway lives this perilous life. And actually, either one of those options and the community forest, they're as good as it gets. Because the people in the Teanaway have conserved that land, taken care of it. And my fear now, once you make it a community forest, you're gonna love it to death. You should go up there on a holiday weekend and look at, there used to be a campground at Dickey Creek, partway up the North Fork, 29 Pines, Stafford Creek, Tasland, and Indian Camp. Dickey Creek is gone. It's a big overpass now for salmon passage. And the tribe, Yakima tribe is doing all that work. Fish and Wildlife co-manages with DNR, the community forest, and they're doing a lot of riparian recovery up the Teanaway to store more water. We call it creating a sponge. And that's when you see they're putting all the logs and everything in that creek. One special guy to me was a man named Don Osmonovich. Any of you know Donnie? Donnie's got 160 acres up Mason Creek. And he and his son Brad were so meticulous about managing that little piece of property that another guy that I worked with and I nominated him to be the tree farmer of the year in the state of Washington. I don't remember the year, but he earned it, he got it, and I was really proud for Don. So we lost a really good friend when we lost Don Osmonovich too. Oh, how long do you want me to ramble? Yeah, that's really good to hear. Oh, well, let's finish the tour, I guess. This was during Jolly Mountain, right along the ridge of the Teanaway Community Forest, doing some firewise around some of the structures of our new neighbors that are very close to the top of Cle Elum Ridge. Your brother took me up the first time in that Jeep, so that's how I found This is the forest that is there now. And so over the last 20 years, those 20 large trees per acre bore cones, reforest that, and now it's getting back to something similar that Boise Cascade would manage for. Fair to say, Phil? Behind this, I always liked this little thing. It turned out it was a dairy barn. Right along the road. And if you look behind it, you'll see a bunch of dead trees, and that was part of a fire the same year as Jolly. I thought Jolly had done it again. And that's just an overview with the Grange and Musser Creek and the Teanaway Ridge. So now the last thing I want to talk about is those lands that are in the dark, that are adjacent to. Can I borrow your finger for a minute?
Me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Trace your finger along the line between the Teanaway and those dark lines. Yep. It's about, thank you.
The railroad properties.
Yeah, absolutely. That is the last piece of 48,000 acres of unsold Plum Creek timberland. And some of the other parcels are there. Worked with a group we call the Checkerboard Partnership, and it's a loose coalition, doesn't have much order, but it's got a lot of passion. And this is the last remaining piece of those 48,000 acres that has not been moved from, held by an LLC managed by Nature Conservancy. All the rest of those lands have been put into or are about to be put into federal or state ownership. This is the last parcel. What we would like to do is create one more, either another community forest or attach it to the Teanaway Community Forest. DNR they don't get a lot of money to manage the Teanaway currently. And so they're a little reticent about taking on any more ground. But if we can't do something with it's about 10,000 acres. If we can't do something to incorporate that into long-term, not to be built on by the rest of the ridge, if we can pull that off, it'll either be added to the Teanaway Community Forest or perhaps become its own community forest. And so that'll be another 10,000 acres between the communities of Cle Elum, Roslyn, and Ronald, and the Teanaway. And that will close the gap on all of the lands in Upper Kittitas County. The major land pieces will all be into some sort of public ownership.
I love the state just bought that.
Say again?
State, they advertise that they bought like that.
I wish that was true, but we're going to get some land and water conservation money. We don't know who's going to get the title, but that land has not yet transferred.
Oh yeah, I heard the state bought it. But...
Well, I hope that's true, but I haven't heard that, and nobody has told me that. I'll have to think on that one.
I think that was Stuart.
Oh, yeah, no, yes.
I hope they bought the ridge. They said something about the ridge. They bought like 90,000 acres of the ridge.
No, it'd be 9,000. That's about 9,000.
It was like all over the papers.
Well, show me and I'll shut up. That's a passion of mine is I gotta protect us and the Teanaway. And that's about all I know how to do. It's a beautiful place. It's survived all of these problems and it's thriving. And our job is to keep it up. So I guess what I will say is that's the Teanaway I know. Yeah. And any of you want to correct me on any piece of it? I am happy to listen. Otherwise, I'll get out of your hair. Yeah, no, but
So there's a chance that this could be developed on property.
currently the LLC owner does not want the land developed. That was one of 7 conditions. Is the land's not to be developed, but at some point they have paid for that and they're gonna want their money back. They haven't given us a deadline, but that is the threat that I see. The good part is there's no water. Yeah. It could happen. We don't believe so, but it's written into the law. That's public knowledge. The law says, if we're not underway with 214,000 additional acre feet of water storage, that could happen. Bumping. Yeah, it's the bumping river. Yeah, Natchez River. Yeah, this is all about cherries and yakima. Oh, well, so yeah, and in that light, I was put on the Teanaway Community Forest Advisory Committee as a county commissioner. That was stated in the law that a commissioner would be appointed to that. And there's 20 people. The only other local person was Jerry Downs. Everybody else was from somewhere else. And we discovered that in transferring the title from John Rudy, U.S. Timberlands, there was about 248 acre feet of water, permanent, long-term senior water rights that came with the land. And my first thing was, knowing the agency I used to work for, is that water is not going to Red Mountain to grow grapes. That water is staying in the upper basin. And so far we've pulled it off. You got it?
Yes, right here. The article right here.
Yeah, we just don't know who's going to get it.
Oh,
Yeah, he's right. It's the central cast. Go ahead and read that to him. if you want.
yeah. Washington wins grant to acquire 9,700 acres of forest land in central Washington Cascades.
But DNR or the communities or who is going to get the title? Currently, the county's got issues with some of that.
Okay, because it said like, they put the map on what
The-
it's showing.
Yep, the money's there. Yeah. We just don't know who's gonna get it.
Mhm.
It's state money.
Yeah.
Yep, good for you.
Mhm.
You're ahead of me on that one. But water is gold in this country and we're not gonna let it get away without some kind of an argument, so. No, when I found out I was a terrible commissioner, I think that Laura O'Shaughnessy fills that role. Because it's in District 2, and so she'd be the logical one. She's also on a national group that's rewriting the federal forest plan. I don't know. Any thoughts on that one, Phil? You're in the know. Is there anything coming on that?
Yeah.
And Commissioner O'Shaughnessy is a member of that group, so hopefully she's looking out for our best interests, because we need to restart the industry.
The commission that controls the forest, the community forest. That's still functioning now, that commission?
There's an advisory board that meets quarterly. And-
There aren't one.
Oh. Go ahead.
Well, I just wondered, I asked if the commission, he says it's a advisory board that you charging for that is supposed to be making decisions about the board. So my question on that is, are there not local people in that advisory board?
More now, and I can't name them, but that was one of my kind of rants, and I think there's several local, they expanded the membership. And I think there's more locals, and I know Jerry is still there, Laura's there, so. I can't tell you who's on that committee anymore. But the land is managed by the Department of Natural Resources. So this group advises when they get asked questions from the DNR. DNR is really struggling to try and fix all of the roads that ORV folks have taken over the ridge. Remember the days the coal slag piles around here? It's starting to look like that, and so trying to get a handle.
I would be totally off base with this question, but back in the 1960s, I had ancestors that lived out on the Teanaway. And back in the 1960s, some oil company, I want to say ExxonMobil, but I don't know for sure, contacted people for the mineral rights that were underground, I guess. Is that, are there,
That's pretty common.
right,
And
Is there
she
anything
said they were contacted for subsurface mineral rights. There's an awful lot of property, and I'll bet most of us don't have the mineral rights to the land we live on, because those large companies originally have kept the rights to those subsurface. I did that for the DNR out towards between Ellensburg and Vantage. There's a lot of DNR ground that they have looked for natural gas and oil. Didn't find enough to do anything with, so all I did was tell farmers that we're probably gonna break a window when they set off their
yeah.
their little explosive charges. So. Anything else? They would have been. I don't. Anybody else know about that? I do not. There was some really big rigs that were in the Rosa Canyon. They were out on in that land that we were subsurfacing and put a big rig out there, but I didn't know about any up here. I'd keep that one. I'd keep that one under wraps. But whatever it was, it must not have been mineable. You know, there's a lot of mining claims. All of this country has got a lot of claims. Liberty's about the only one that really produces it on the road. All right, well, with that, I'll take my leave.